The sun rose over the village of Mbale, painting the morning mist with streaks of gold and pink. Nestled between the arms of the great mountain, the village was a small, vibrant world of its own. Smoke began to curl from the thatched roofs of the huts, carrying the scent of burning wood and last night's cooking fires into the cool air. Birdsong erupted from the dense surrounding forest, a chaotic symphony that marked the beginning of another day. By the riverbank, where the water ran clear and cold from the mountain springs, a young woman named Anicia knelt in the soft earth, her fingers carefully parting tall stalks of grass in search of the herbs her mother needed. Anicia was the only daughter of Nemono, the village's most respected healer and midwife. At 17, she carried the weight of her future role with a quiet seriousness, but her eyes, when she thought no one was looking, held the bright, curious light of a dreamer. Her hands, though skilled at identifying moringa leaves and neem bark, also longed to trace the patterns on the backs of river turtles or shape figures from the red clay by the water. "Anicia, don't dawdle! The sun climbs higher and the ogwe roots will lose their strength if dug after the dew dries," the voice of her mother, Nemono, carried from the path above the bank. Anicia sighed, a small, secret smile playing on her lips. She loved her mother, loved the art of healing, but sometimes she wished for a task that didn't have rules about the sun and the dew. "I'm coming, Mother," she called back, her voice melodious. She carefully placed the last of the aloe vera leaves into her woven basket and stood, brushing the dark soil from her simple conga dress. The fabric, wrapped elegantly around her, was a deep indigo with patterns of ivory stars, a gift from her aunt in Kampala. As she turned to climb the bank, a sudden flash of color in the water caught her eye. Not a fish, but something iridescent. A smooth, dark stone? She leaned closer. There, half buried in the sandy riverbed, was a polished piece of obsidian, but it seemed to move with a light of its own. Intrigued, she stepped into the shallows, the cold water soaking the hem of her dress. She reached down, her fingers closing not around a stone, but around something smooth, cool, and coiled. It was an armband, a serpentine bracelet carved from a single piece of obsidian so black it seemed to swallow the light, yet it shimmered with hidden depths of green and blue, like a starless night sky seen through forest leaves. The carving was exquisite. The serpent's head rested against its own body, its eyes two tiny, perfect inlaid chips of amber that seemed to watch her. As she lifted it, the water dripped from it like liquid diamond. A strange feeling settled in her chest, a pull, a recognition that made no sense. This was no ordinary piece of lost jewelry. It felt ancient and heavy with a story. She glanced around. The riverbank was empty save for the chattering birds. No one had come looking for it. Carefully, she slipped the cool obsidian over her hand and onto her upper arm. It fit as if made for her, the cool weight a comforting, familiar presence against her skin. "Anicia!" Her mother's call was sharper now. Startled, Anicia quickly gathered her basket and scrambled up the bank, the new weight on her arm both strange and thrilling. Life in Mbale moved to the rhythms of the earth and the community. Anicia's days were filled with learning which bark poultice reduced fever, which root tea eased childbirth pains, how to interpret the dreams of the anxious, and how to speak to the spirits that resided in the ancient mvule tree at the village center. Her mother was a stern but loving teacher, and the villagers treated Anicia with the respect accorded to a healer in training. Yet the armband changed something in her. She began to have vivid dreams of moving through dense, silent forests, not on 2 feet, but with a smooth, powerful glide. Dreams of seeing the world through slitted, amber eyes, of tasting the air with a flicking tongue and knowing the secrets it carried. Fear from a mouse, the heat of a predator, the cool promise of water. She would wake with the scent of damp earth and crushed herbs in her nostrils, her heart pounding with a memory that was not her own. She told no one, not even her mother. The armband never left her skin. It seemed to fuse to her, becoming a part of her. Sometimes, in the quiet of the forest, while gathering herbs, she would talk to it. "Who made you?" she would whisper, tracing the carved scales. The amber eyes just stared back, holding a millennia of silence. One evening, during the season of the long rains, a great storm gathered over the mountain. The sky turned the color of a bruise, and the wind howled like a grieving spirit. Lightning tore the sky, and thunder shook the very bones of the earth. The villagers huddled in their huts. Nemono, her face grave, lit special herbs and chanted prayers to calm the raging spirits of the storm. Anicia, however, did not feel any fear. Standing at the doorway of their hut, watching the apocalyptic display, she felt a surge of wild, electric energy. The obsidian band on her arm grew warm, almost hot, and in a blinding flash of lightning that struck the old mvule tree, splitting its great trunk like a sound the world cracking open, she saw him. Not with her eyes, but in her mind. A tall, proud man with skin the deep, rich brown of wet earth after the first rain. His eyes were amber, not just the color, but the very same luminous, knowing amber of the serpent's eyes on her arm. He was dressed in robes of a style no one in the village wore, patterned with geometric shapes that seemed to move. He stood under a different sky, in a different time, looking at her across an impossible distance. He reached out a hand, and his lips formed a single, silent word that was carried away by the thunder. Soon. The vision lasted only a heartbeat. When the afterimage of the lightning faded, there was only the pouring rain and the shattered, smoking tree. But Anicia's heart was thundering louder than the storm. She knew with a certainty that sank into her soul that the man in the vision and the serpent of the armband were one. And she knew something else, something that both terrified and exhilarated her. She loved him, this impossible, ancient, fragmented being. She loved the sorrow in his amber eyes, the nobility in his posture, the silent call that had echoed in her spirit since the moment she pulled the obsidian from the river. The storm passed, leaving a wounded village. The sacred mvule was damaged, a bad omen. The elders gathered, their faces lined with worry. Rumors of angered ancestors, of broken taboos. Anicia, helping tend to those shaken by the storm, kept her secret clutched to her chest, the armband a hidden brand beneath her sleeve. A week later, a stranger arrived in Mbale. He came at dusk, walking out of the very forest where Anicia gathered her herbs. He was tall and moved with an unnatural, graceful silence. His name, he said, was Chuma. He was a traveling metalsmith and trader from the north, he explained to the village headman, seeking shelter and a chance to trade his wares for a few nights. His voice was low, a smooth rumble that seemed to vibrate in the chest. When Anicia first saw him, bringing him a calabash of water at her mother's instruction, the world stopped. It was him, the man from the storm vision, the same earth-brown skin, the same proud bearing. And his eyes? They were a warm, human brown in the firelight, but when a spark from the hearth flew, for an instant they flashed a luminous, familiar amber. Their eyes met across the fire. A shock pure and electric passed between them. The gourd of water nearly slipped from Anicia's hands. Chuma's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. He gave a slight, slow nod, as if acknowledging a truth only they shared. "Thank you, daughter of the healer." His voice washed over her like warm honey. He stayed. He set up a small forge at the edge of the village, his skilled hands crafting beautiful jewelry from copper and iron, repairing tools, telling fragments of stories from distant lands. The villagers were wary at first, but his quiet demeanor, his fair trades, and his obvious skill won them over, all except for Nemono. Anicia's mother watched Chuma with the sharp, suspicious eyes of a woman who communicated with spirits. "There is a shadow around that one," she warned Anicia one evening as they ground herbs, "a coldness behind his eyes. He is not what he seems. You will stay away from him, daughter." But it was too late. Anicia was drawn to him like a moth to a flame that burned cold. She found reasons to pass by his forge, delivering a poultice for a fictitious burn, asking about the origins of a strange stone he had. Their conversations were stilted, formal, yet charged with an immense unspoken voltage. He would watch her with an intensity that was both possessive and profoundly sad. One afternoon, the years that followed were a golden, sun-drenched dream woven into the fabric of Mbale's daily life. Sakai, under the name Chuma, built a home at the forest's edge, not a hut, but a sturdy, beautiful dwelling of clay bricks and strong timber, with a wide, welcoming porch and a forge that glowed like a friendly heart in the evenings. He was no longer just a passing metalsmith. He became part of the village. He crafted the finest hoes and machetes, which never seemed to dull. He made jewelry so exquisite that women saved for years to own a piece, each coil and pattern seeming to hold a secret light. But his greatest creation, the villagers whispered, was the happiness of Nemono's daughter. Ncia's mother, Nemono, resisted the union with a silence that was colder than any shouting. She saw the way her daughter blossomed, the light that seemed to emanate from her, but the healer's spirit remained troubled. She would watch Sakai from her doorway, her eyes missing nothing, the way shadows sometimes clung to him a moment too long, the unnatural stillness that came over him just before a storm, a faint, cool scent of stone and deep earth that lingered around him, even on the hottest day. She conducted silent rituals, casting protective bones and reading the ashes of special herbs, but the readings were always clouded, the future murky and split by a great, dark, serpentine shape. "He is not of our time, daughter," she said one final time the night before Ncia moved to the forest house. Her voice was not angry, but heavy with a grief she could not fully explain. "His soul walks a path we cannot see. To bind your life to his is to step off the path of the sun and walk forever in a twilight land." Ncia, her heart too full of Sakai's whispered promises and the feel of his hand in hers, kissed her mother's worried brow. "My path is with him, mother. My sun rises and sets in his eyes. Trust that my love is my protection." Nemono said nothing more. She presented Ncia with a small, worn leather pouch on a thong. "Wear this always. It contains ndome seeds for clarity, mwarubine bark for strength, and a sliver of mirror stone. To remember who you are, even when the world tries to show you another face." Ncia accepted the gift, touched, and wore it faithfully around her neck, a small counterweight to the obsidian serpent on her arm. The first decades of their century were a masterpiece of ordinary joy. They learned each other in the quiet ways of married life. Ncia continued her healing work, her knowledge deepening as Sakai, with his ancient memories, taught her forgotten uses for plants, songs to sing over wounds that sped healing in ways that seemed magical. Together, they became the unseen guardians of Mbale. When drought threatened, Sakai would disappear into the forest and return to show Ncia a hidden, perennial spring. When a strange sleeping sickness came, it was Ncia's remedies, guided by Sakai's intuition, that cured it. They had children, 2 sons and a daughter, each born with a peculiar fleck of amber in their brown eyes and a preternatural calmness. The villagers adored them, though they were quieter, more observant than other children. They seemed to understand the language of animals and grew up strong and wise. Sakai loved them with a fierce, aching tenderness that held a shadow of future loss. He taught his sons the secrets of metal and fire, not just the craft, but how to listen to the song within the ore. He taught his daughter the stories of the stars, names for constellations that had been forgotten for 1,000 years. Encia watched her family grow, her heart swelling with a love so profound it was sometimes a physical pain. But on the deepest nights, when Sakai thought she slept, she would feel the tension thrumming through his body. She would see him staring into the darkness, his eyes reflecting not the moon, but an inner amber glow. The obsidian armband, which had been quiet, began to sometimes feel restless against her skin, a faint, cold vibration. She knew the serpent within him was not sleeping. It was waiting. Their children grew, married, and had their own children. Mbale changed. The world outside pressed closer. Traders brought news of colonizers, of new borders drawn on maps. The village adapted, but Sakai and Encia, though they appeared to age, did so with a strange, slow grace. When Encia's mother, Nemono, passed at a great old age, her last words to Encia were, "You are still you, my child. Remember the mirror." By the time their great-grandchildren were playing in the yard, the villagers no longer saw Chuma the metalsmith and Encia the healer. They saw the ancient wise ones of the forest. Legends grew around them. Some said they had made a pact with the mountain spirits for long life. Others whispered they were spirits themselves, taking human form. Sakai's forge still glowed, but his work became rarer, more mystical, amulets and talismans for those in true need. As the 80th year of their century together approached, the subtle signs became harder to ignore. Sakai would sometimes disappear for days, returning gaunt and weary, smelling of damp caves and cold stone. "The call grows stronger," he admitted one night, holding Encia as a cold wind rattled their now ancient house. "The earth pulls at me, the urge to shed this skin, to coil and burrow and be simple. It is a song in my blood, and its volume increases with every season." Encia, her heart now streaked with silver, but her eyes still holding the light of the girl by the river, pressed closer. "I am here. My love is here. It is your anchor. Hold on to me." He did, but the internal battle was etched on his face. His human moments became more intensely human, more passionate, more tender, more devoted, as if he were stockpiling memories of feeling against the coming emptiness. And his serpentine moments became more pronounced. His eyes would lose their focus, becoming distant, reptilian. He preferred raw meat to cooked. He could sit motionless for hours, and the temperature around him would drop. On the afternoon of their 90th anniversary, a tragedy struck. A flash flood, born from a storm on the mountain, tore through the lower part of the village. Sakai, moving with a speed that belied his apparent age, plunged into the raging waters again and again, pulling children to safety. In the chaos, Encia saw it. As he strained against a torrent to free a boy pinned by a log, his skin seemed to shimmer, scales flashing for a second in the murky water. His eyes, when he emerged, were pure, molten amber, his face a mask of primordial struggle. He had saved a dozen lives, but the use of such intense effort had weakened his human hold. That night he trembled violently by the fire. "It took too much to hold the form," he gasped, his voice rasping, almost a hiss. "The beast is strong, Encia, so strong. It does not think, it does not love, it only is, and it wants to be." For the first time, Encia felt a frisson of real fear, not for herself, but for him. She saw the torture he was enduring, the two natures warring inside a single soul.
She held him, singing the lullabies she had sung to their children, her tears mixing with the sweat on his brow. The leather pouch from her mother felt hot against her chest. The last decade was a long, slow farewell. They spoke of everything and nothing. They revisited their favorite places, the riverbank, the clearing with the view of the mountain, the ancient, now healed mvule tree. Sakai began to give things away. His finest tools went to his most devoted apprentice. He crafted one last piece, a simple iron bracelet for Nsia, engraved with a pattern of interlocking circles, one smooth, for her, one scaled, for him. "To feel when I cannot speak," he said, his voice thick. He told her where he would go when the change came, a deep cave system in the heart of the mountain, known only to him. "I will be there. The man will be buried deep, but he will be there. And I will hear you if you call, not with ears, but with whatever remains of me." The last day dawned clear and painfully beautiful. It was the exact 100-year to the day from their meeting by the river. Sakai seemed calm, almost serene. The frantic struggle was gone, replaced with a deep, sorrowful acceptance. They shared a simple meal. He held her face in his hands, memorizing every line, every freckle, every silver strand. "You have given me a century of light," he whispered, his amber eyes clear and human and full of an agony that cracked Nsia's heart in two. "You have made the curse a blessing. Remember that. No matter what happens next, remember the century of sun."
The silence after Sakai's transformation was the loudest sound Nsia had ever known. It wasn't just an absence of his voice, his laugh, the rhythmic sound of his breathing at night. It was an active, consuming void that filled the forest house, the village, the very air she tried to breathe. The first night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the porch where they had spent countless evenings, staring into the black wall of trees, feeling the iron bracelet cold and heavy on her wrist. The obsidian armband on her upper arm was now inert, just a piece of cool jewelry, its connection to the living serpent severed by the completion of the curse's turn. Morning came, cruel in its normalcy. Birds sang, the sun rose. Villagers, now townspeople, for Mbale had grown, went about their business. A young boy, the great-great-grandson of one of her childhood friends, came by to see if Grandfather Chuma needed help fetching water. Nsia looked at the child, his face open and expectant, and the reality of her new existence slammed into her. She managed to say, "Grandfather has gone on a long journey, to the mountain." The boy nodded, accepting the statement of the ancient wise one without question, and skipped away. The journey of 100 years began not with epic trials, but with the brutal simplicity of daily survival. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time in a century. Her children were long grown, with families and lives in other towns, even other countries, drawn away by the changing world. They visited, of course, concerned for their ageless mother who seemed to wither in spirit, if not in body. They urged her to leave the old house in the woods and come live with them in Kampala or Nairobi. She refused with a quiet firmness that brooked no argument. Her place was here. Her vigil was here. Years passed. The world, as Sakai had predicted, changed at a dizzying pace. The colonial era came in full force, with its new laws, new gods, and new ways of thinking that sought to erase the old. Missionaries preached against pagan beliefs. The sacred Mvule tree, long healed from the lightning strike, was cut down to make way for a new road. Nsia watched it happen, her heart a stone in her chest. The forest around her home was pushed back, acre by acre, for farms and then for bungalows with tin roofs. Through it all, she maintained her work as a healer. It was her tether to humanity, to purpose. But her methods were now viewed with suspicion by the young and the modern. They preferred pills from the new clinic.
Yet the old-timers and those with ailments the clinic couldn't name still came to her door, drawn by the legend of her knowledge. She treated them, her hands still steady, her knowledge now deepened by a century of practice and the lost lore Sakai had shared. She never accepted money, only goods or favors. Her needs were few. She lived on memories and stubborn hope. Every year, on the anniversary of the transformation, she would undertake a pilgrimage. She would pack a small sack with a few items, a gourd of water, some dried fruit, the iron bracelet warm from her skin, and walk into the diminishing forest towards the mountain. She knew the way to the cave system Sakai had described. The entrance was a mere crack in a moss-covered rock face, hidden behind a waterfall that flowed only in the rainy season. She could never bring herself to enter. The darkness within pulsed with a cold, reptilian energy that made the hairs on her neck stand up. This was not her husband's sanctuary. It was the serpent's lair. Instead, she would sit on a flat stone by the pool below the waterfall, and she would talk. She told the silent crack in the rock about the year that had passed, the birth of a new great-great-grandchild, the death of an old friend, the new road, the war that came and went, the First World War, though she did not call it that. She spoke of her loneliness, her anger sometimes, her unwavering love always. She sang the old songs they had loved. She would sit until the sun began to dip, then place a small offering, a sprig of an herb he liked, a smooth stone from the river, and walk home, feeling emptier than when she had come. The decades were a blur of seasons and sorrow. Her body aged, but slowly, strangely. The curse, or perhaps her connection to it, had granted her an extended lifespan, but it felt less like a blessing and more like a sentence. She watched generations turn over. She buried her own children, one by one, a pain that was different from losing Sakai, but just as deep. At each funeral, she was the ancient, dry-eyed matriarch, a figure of awe and slight fear. "How does she endure?" they whispered. They didn't understand. She was enduring for something. She was a bridge across a chasm of time, and her only duty was not to break. The middle of the century brought the greatest turmoil. The fight for independence swept through the land. Strife, violence, hope, betrayal. Mbale was not untouched. Soldiers came. People disappeared. The modern world with all its noise and fury was upon them. Insia's house was once searched by young men with guns looking for subversives. They found only an old woman with strange eyes and older artifacts. They left, unnerved. Through it all, the iron bracelet stayed on her wrist, a private truth in a world of public lies. In the 60s, when she was, by all accounts, over 180 years old, a different kind of visitor came, an anthropologist from Europe, a young, earnest woman named Dr. Elara Mbeki. She had heard legends of the immortal healer of Mbale and came seeking oral histories. Insia, who had long stopped speaking of the past to anyone, found herself disarmed by the woman's intelligent eyes and respectful curiosity. Over many weeks, Elara visited. Insia told her carefully edited stories, folk tales, healing practices, histories of the village. She never spoke of Sakai, of the serpent, of the curse, but Elara was perceptive. She noticed the obsidian armband that never left Insia's arm and the iron bracelet worn smooth. She noticed how Insia's eyes would go distant and fixed on the mountain at certain times of the year. "Grandmother," Elara said gently one afternoon as they shared tea, "the stories you tell, they are full of wisdom, but there is one story you are not telling, the one that weighs on you." Insia looked at this young woman from a new world, a woman of science who still had room for mystery in her heart. For the first time in over half a century, the loneliness cracked open. She did not tell the whole story, but she showed Elara the iron bracelet. "It was my husband's," she said, her voice like rustling leaves. "He is sleeping, a long, long sleep, in the mountain. I am waiting for him to wake." Elara did not scoff. She took Insia's gnarled hand and asked, "How long has he slept?" 47 years, Insia answered, the precision of the number shocking them both. Ilara visited for several more years whenever she could return from her university. She became a lifeline, a connection to a future Insia was otherwise struggling to understand. She brought books, a radio, later a small television. Insia saw men walk on the moon. She saw the world become a global village. It all felt distant, like a play on a stage. Her reality was the forest, the mountain, the cold iron on her wrist, and the growing, gnawing fear that when the 100 years were done, she would be nothing but a ghost, and Sakai would return to find only dust. The final decades of the separation were the hardest. The forest around her house was now a protected park, her dwelling a historical oddity. She was a living monument, visited by tourists on cultural tours. She played the part, a silent, ancient figure, weaving baskets or grinding herbs, her eyes seeing past them all. Her body was now truly old, thin, bent. Moving was pain, remembering was pain. Only her will remained untouched, a steel thread running through the crumbling parchment of her being. She stopped making the annual pilgrimage when walking became impossible. Instead, she would sit on her porch, facing the mountain, and send her thoughts, her memories, her love like arrows aimed at the heart of the rock. She talked to him in her mind constantly, a running conversation with a ghost who was not dead. Do you remember the taste of the mangoes from our first harvest? Do you remember the sound of our daughter's first laugh? The forge fire is cold, my love. I keep the house as you left it. I am still here. I am waiting. The 99th year came. A deep, frantic energy began to stir in her. It was a physical sensation, like a second heartbeat, a tug in her blood. The obsidian armband, dormant for a century, began, once again, to grow faintly warm. At first, she thought it was a trick of her aged senses, but the warmth persisted, a gentle, persistent pulse that mirrored her own fading heartbeat. The iron bracelet, too, sometimes felt as if it vibrated with a distant echo. Hope, dangerous and terrifying, began to unfurl in her chest after a century of stern suppression. It was a physical agony. What if he didn't come back? What if the curse had won, and the serpent was all that remained? What if he returned and found her this ancient, withered husk, and his love turned to pity? The final months were a time of meticulous, quiet preparation. She asked a neighbor boy to help her clean the house thoroughly, airing out rooms that had been closed for decades.
The second vigil began, but it was a different kind of waiting. Nyasa was not the same ancient, crumbling soul who had watched him leave the first time. The love of their second century had strengthened her, body and spirit. The unnatural aging that had gripped her had not just reversed, it had settled into a kind of suspended vitality. She appeared now as a woman in her prime, perhaps 50 years of age, her hair a mix of dark brown and silver, her body strong from a lifetime of work, and her spirit tempered by fire. She was not waiting to die. She was waiting to live again. The first years were occupied not with grief, but with a kind of sacred stewardship. She tended to Sakai's legacy. She organized his notebooks, filled with his careful script. They contained not just love letters to her or fragments of history, but intricate diagrams of the stars as they were 1,000 years ago, recipes for alloys unknown to modern metallurgy, and philosophies of the natural world so profound they read like poetry. She began, cautiously, to share pieces with Dr. Ilara Mbeki, who by now was her closest link to the outside world. Ilara, retired and wizened herself, would visit, and they would spend days poring over the texts, the younger woman awestruck by the depth of knowledge. She was writing a bridge, Ilara said one day, her finger tracing a passage about the consciousness of rivers. She was trying to build a pathway for his own mind to follow back to itself. Nyasa nodded. That was her work now, to maintain the bridge. She also tended his stone sculptures. She built a simple, open-sided shelter in the garden to house them, protecting them from the rain.
She would sit among them, the stone Nyasa by the river, the dancing couple, the vigilant serpent with blue eyes. She would talk to them as she had once talked to the cave, but now the conversation felt less like a cry into a void and more like a meditation. She was rehearsing their story, keeping its edges sharp, its colors bright, for the day he would need to remember. The world continued its frenetic evolution. The 21st century arrived. Mbale was now a small city. The forest around her home was a designated cultural heritage site, thanks largely to Alara's advocacy. Nyasa's dwelling was protected, a living museum, though she remained its fiercely private curator. Tourists still came, but they now saw a strikingly handsome, ageless woman who spoke little and smiled enigmatically. New legends sprouted. She was a guardian spirit, a forest nymph, a descendant of an unbroken line of witches. She let them talk. Technology invaded her solitude. A satellite dish appeared on a neighbor's roof. Cell phones chirped and sang. Alara's grandchildren taught Nyasa to use a tablet computer. She found it useful for documenting Sakai's work, for keeping digital records, but the glow of the screen felt cold compared to the warmth of parchment or the silent wisdom of stone. She used it to track time with an obsessive precision the ancient calendar stones could never provide. She had a countdown. The annual pilgrimage resumed, but now it was a journey of strength, not despair. Each year on the anniversary, she would hike to the cave entrance, her steps sure, a pack on her back. She no longer just sat and talked, she worked. She cleared the area around the hidden crack in the rock, ensuring no debris would block it. She planted a circle of aromatic herbs, sage, rosemary, lavender, that she had genetically nurtured from seeds Sakai had once described from his ancient homeland. Herbs of memory, he'd called them. She would burn small bundles of them, letting the fragrant smoke drift into the cave's darkness. Then she would take out one of his stone carvings, a small one, a replica of the obsidian armband, and place it just inside the entrance, an offering, a trigger, a physical piece of their story left in the serpent's domain. She believed with every fiber of her being that on some level the beast would sense it, coil around it, absorb its meaning through the slow patience of stone. After 30 years of this new vigil, Alara passed away peacefully in her sleep. At the funeral, Nyasa stood alone, a timeless figure among the mourners. Alara's granddaughter, a young woman named Amara, approached her. "My grandmother said you were the keeper of the truest story she ever heard. She said to tell you, the bridge is holding." Nyasa simply took Amara's hand and pressed a smooth, cool river stone into it, one of Sakai's first carvings. No words were needed. The stewardship had passed to a new generation. The middle decades of the separation were a time of deepening inward focus. Nyasa began to have dreams again, not the serpent dreams of her youth, but vivid, clear visions of Sakai's human consciousness, trapped but aware, deep inside the sleeping beast. She saw him in a cavern of his own mind, surrounded by shimmering, fragile threads of light, their memories. She saw the serpent's instincts, like a dark, slow-moving river, constantly threatening to erode the banks of that inner sanctum. And she saw him there, her prince, tirelessly weaving, repairing, strengthening the threads with his will alone. In the dreams, she could join him. They couldn't speak, but they could touch the threads together. She would show him a memory, their daughter's wedding, the taste of honey from their own hives, the feel of sun on the porch swing, and the thread would glow brighter, stronger. He was using her love, relayed through this strange dream state connection, as his primary tool of resistance. She woke up from these sessions exhausted, but exhilarated. The vigil was no longer passive. She was fighting the curse with him in the trenches of his own psyche. She started a new journal, recording the dreams, mapping the cavern of his mind. She called it the Atlas of the Interior Mountain. As the 75th year approached, she noticed changes in the environment around the cave. The herbs she planted grew unnaturally large and potent. Animals began to behave oddly. A family of monkeys took to leaving small offerings, shiny pebbles, bits of fruit, at the cave mouth. A massive python, a natural cousin to the cursed Ngozi, took up residence in a tree nearby, not as a threat but as a silent sentinel. The forest itself seemed to be acknowledging the sacred, troubled creature within the mountain. The boundary between the supernatural and the natural was wearing thin. Nyasa understood. The curse was a wound in the fabric of the world. Their love, their resistance, was both aggravating that wound and trying to heal it. The closer they got to the century's turn, the more the echo of the struggle leaked into reality. With 10 years to go, the pull became physical again, just as it had at the end of the first separation. The obsidian armband grew warm. The iron and silver bracelets hummed on her wrist. Her dreams of the interior mountain became nightly urgent battlegrounds. Sakai's human form in the dreams looked weary, frayed at the edges. The dark river of the serpent's nature was rising. "Hold on," she whispered to him one night in the space between dream and waking. "I am coming. The bridge is almost complete." She intensified her physical preparations. She rebuilt part of the forge, stocking it with the purest charcoal and special ores Sakai had secreted away from his ancient homeland. She prepared a room in the house with soft light, clean linens, and shelves filled with his favorite things: stones, feathers, old tools. She was preparing a landing place for a soul returning from a century-long war. The final year was a state of heightened awareness. Colors were brighter, sounds were sharper. She could feel the very rotation of the earth. She spent most of her time at the cave, not just on the anniversary. She sang the old songs, the lullabies, the forging songs, the planting chants. She read from his notebooks aloud, her voice echoing faintly in the stony throat of the mountain. She was bombarding the darkness with signals of home. On the final night, there was no question of sleep. A storm gathered, not of rain, but of energy. The air crackled. The sentinel python slid from its tree and disappeared into the undergrowth. The circle of memory herbs glowed with a faint bioluminescence she had never seen before. Nyasa stood before the cave entrance, a lone figure in the electric darkness. She held the original obsidian armband in one hand and the small stone replica in the other. A circuit completed. For a long moment, nothing, only the hum of the charged night. Then a sound from deep within the mountain, not a hiss, not a growl, a deep, resonant groan as of continents shifting, as of chains of stone snapping. The ground trembled beneath her feet. From the black crack, a plume of dust exhaled. Then a shape began to emerge. It was slow, labored, scraping against the rock. The massive, obsidian-scaled head of Ngozi appeared. But it was not the powerful, fluid creature of 100 years before. It moved with a terrible, broken slowness. Its scales were dull, caked with mineral residue of deep stone. One of its amber eyes was milky, clouded. It dragged its great body out into the circle of glowing herbs and collapsed, its sides heaving. Nyasa's heart clenched. This was not a triumphant return. This was a casualty. The beast was wounded.